Hey folks, it's day 14 of my Corona beard, and it looks like it's going to get longer because we just got another extension for another 30 days. So let's see what it'll look like in 30 days. Hey, I appreciate everybody sending me your emails and the references you did and the videos you did. I got a great response off the last email I sent out. I really appreciate your feedback. I love hearing from you. I try to answer every email I get, and there were some that went to junk. I didn't realize it, so I just got those answered today. None of us asked to be in a pandemic. It's not like we said, hey, I'm going to throw my name in the hat and maybe it gets picked out. I can be in a pandemic and I can lose my job and I can not know where I'm going to get any income from. And I can stay at home for 6 to 8 weeks and not be able to go out except to get some food or put some gas in the car or medical emergency. This sounds like a lot of fun. I can go stand in line at the supermarket and wait to get in and see what's on the shelf that I can pick up, and I can look all over Los Angeles for toilet paper. Of course, I've got to bring that up. Now, it's a circumstance none of us asked to be in. The question is, how do we handle things that happen that are non-optimum, but we didn't ask to be in? They just sort of turned up. There's an adversarial situation that we have to handle. Well, I want to share a story with you. I'm going to try to keep this as short as I can, about a family member of mine that had a big impact on me. I grew up in a small town in Indiana, in central Indiana. It was about 2,000 people. I was the fourth generation in that community. And I had an uncle, Uncle Joe Cotton, who was quite a celebrity in our family. And when he would come to town, there'd be all this great fanfare and excitement. And I can remember sitting on my grandparents' floor, listening to Joe tell his stories. And I knew he was a pilot in the Air Force. He was always a very enthusiastic man with a lot of vigor and a great positive attitude. Always really liked him, didn't know that much about him. As time went on, I learned that he was in World War II, flew a B-17 bomber. He was shot down over Greece, and he hid for 5 months with the Greek underground and escaped back to Italy. I also knew that he had been in the Air Force and that there had been some problems and he was not in the Air Force anymore. That's about what I knew. Now, Joe lives in Northern California. I moved to Southern California. I started to have work in Northern California, and I would go by, called him up. We started having lunch. If I stayed up there, I'd stay at his house. And I got to spend quite a bit of time with him, talking to him. Now, the simplicity is this. Yes, he was flying his first flight as a Army Air Corps pilot in a B-17. He had the front of his plane blown up with flak. He's able to land the plane and save his guys and hid with the Greek underground for 5 months. And he told me stories about, they hated dogs barking. Couldn't build a fire because they were afraid the Nazis would find them. So they couldn't stay warm, but more than that, they couldn't cook their food. So they'd catch a chicken or catch some rabbits or something like that, but they couldn't cook them because they didn't want to see the fire. They didn't want to get caught. And he wound up contracting yellow jaundice and was almost dying. And they were able to get on Italian minesweepers, when I think it was, came in and picked him up and got him back to Italy. And he was spent a couple of months in the hospital and recovered. Now, Joe was in his mid-80s when he was telling me these stories. And we were out to lunch one time, and the waitress comes over and goes, "Mr. Cotton, was that meal okay?" And he looked up at her and he goes, "Oh, yeah." And looked at me and he shook his head and he goes, "Lance, I haven't had a bad meal since 1943. And that's the first lesson I want to share with you. I think a lot of us have gotten a little soft. I know I have. You're used to running to the supermarket 24 hours a day. The shelves are always full. You can pick up what you want. There's not a big line to get in there. As a matter of fact, the line irritates you a little bit if you have to wait in line at the supermarket. Now we have to wait in line to get in the supermarket. When we get in there, we don't know what's going to be on the shelf. We're thankful for whatever we get. And the same thing with gasoline, the same thing with being able to run out and have a lunch with somebody or meet someone for a cup of coffee. If there is a Starbucks or a Coffee Bean or a coffee shop open, you can't sit there. You got to take your coffee and walk outside, and there's tape on the floor to stand 6 feet apart. At least that's what it is with me. I'm going to be a lot more appreciative when those things turn back to normal, if they really do. There may be a new normal that we get. And I think that's a good thing. I think we're going to have a little different attitude on life. Now, I want to show you a couple of photos here if I can, so you see who my Uncle Joe was. So this is Joe, and right there with the arrow over his head. He's in his 80s, his wife and two of his children, and we're going out to dinner. Now, after the war, what Joe wound up doing was he went into He stayed in the Air Force when the Air Force was formed, and he was stationed all over the U.S. But what I remember was he wound up at Edwards Air Force Base as one of the top test pilots. He and Chuck Yeager were the only two test pilots at Edwards that didn't have college degrees. And Joe was the senior test pilot on the XB-70 Valkyrie project, which was a supersonic bomber that was built in the mid-60s that traveled at, I think, Mach 3 and was exceedingly accurate with its bomb drops. And it was the height of the Cold War, and this was to show the Soviet Union what we could do if we wanted to. So there was a photo shoot that was asked for by General Electric because General Electric had the engines on this airplane, and they wanted to do photos with all their planes that had General Electric engines. So Joe set up the flight or the photo shoot. He's in this F-104 Starfighter right here, and all these other planes are going to come up and fly along the side, the XB-70, and a Learjet's going to come up along there and take their photos. And he said what happened was one of the other F-104 Starfighter, which is here, came in, and the photographer asked him to get a little closer to the XB-70. And the pressure over the wing picked the plane up and blew it across these rear stabilizers, and the plane basically crashed, blew up in midair. 5 men were killed, crashed in the Mojave Desert. And this picture was in Life magazine. That's Joe looking through the wreckage. And what happened at that time, I'm going to pop out of here for just a second. What happened at that time was he was a full colonel in the Air Force. He was almost going to be, it's my understanding, he was supposed to be promoted to a general in the next couple of months. And somebody way above him wanted to have a scapegoat. They wanted, we call it putting a head on a pike. They wanted someone to be responsible for this. And he got named. He said he had 8 generals that were saying he did everything by the book. He didn't do anything wrong. We don't want to lose the man. And it didn't matter. They came down and they court-martialed him, and he was held responsible for that plane accident. And he realized that his Air Force career was over. He didn't do anything wrong. He found himself once again in an awkward situation, an adversarial situation, had to route out of the Air Force. And Joe's a very humble guy, didn't know what he was going to do. Oddly enough, American Airlines and United Airlines couldn't wait to get a hold of him, and he wound up going with United and was the senior test pilot at United for, I think, 10 or 12 years, the last 10 or 12 years of his career. But I was having dinner with him one time, and I was talking to him about how he's handled these rough situations in his life and what a great attitude he has. And I said, you know, look, you had that situation in Greece, and that could have decimated you. You came back, you had a stellar career in the Air Force, and then this thing happens and, you know, you're out on your can sort of. And I said, you come back, and I'm going to pop this back up on the screen again because he told me something that's really stayed with me. And he said, you know, Lance, there we go. Come on. He says, in flying, I learned something. He says, in flying, I learned that your attitude determines your altitude. And I knew if I kept a good positive attitude, I'd have plenty of altitude. I wouldn't hit the ground. And you know, and when we talk about the attitude on an airplane, if you have a nose down attitude, the plane's going down. If you have a level attitude, it's going level. If you have a positive attitude, it's going up. And they're saying you keep your attitude will determine the altitude that you wind up at. And you know people, we all know people that have this negative attitude, and it's always like everything's bad and they're pounding themselves into the ground on an ongoing basis. And you also know people that sort of have a level attitude. Well, it doesn't matter to me. Whatever you want, it's okay with me. Well, who knows? You know, oh, well, I guess that's the way it's going to go. And then there's folks that have a positive attitude, and they create more space. They create more energy. They seem to create more opportunity around them. And that's the type of person that I aspired to be. And Joe's lessons have really helped me so much when I run into an adversarial situation, or I run into a set of circumstances that I didn't create. Sometimes I did, but I didn't create, but I still had to handle them. And I think most of the people listening to this have a very positive attitude. I read the emails you send me. You've got a great attitude, but there's those around us that don't. And there's a great concern right now that people are going to get depressed, and there's going to be family problems, and there's going to be, you know, drug problems and all sorts of situations because of the pressure people are under and the fact that they can't interact like they want. It's important that all of us help spread a positive attitude and help people gain some altitude in their life. So reach out to people and rub some positive attitude off on them. And let's keep everybody we know with their head high and a twinkle in their eye. and we're going to come out of this thing shining like great, shining great. We're going to come out of this thing in good shape, and keep a positive attitude. We'll have plenty of altitude.